Working? All right. Hey everyone, Lucas Tamagna-Darr. I'm a quick introduction. So I've been in vulnerability management for over 16 years with Tenable. I'm in the research organization. Our number one focus is writing plugins that are used for scanning for vulnerabilities. Well, I've never been a practitioner patching things, scanning for, in my environment. We have a lot of similar challenges to what our customers deal with. Too many vulnerabilities, not knowing what to cover, how to cover the right ones, getting the coverage out. I've been responsible for helping shape both our tactical response to emerging vulnerabilities, emerging risks, things that everyone's screaming about, and a long-term strategy for our content. How do we get as much out as we can, making sure it's accurate, making sure it's good. Help develop our internal vulnerability database that gives us the context that helps us make the right decisions, making sure we cover what's important. I had a professor in college. I said, the only way to guarantee security of a system in the face of a truly motivated attacker, bury it in a bunker, cut it off from the internet, and you're in good shape. Unfortunately, it's not very useful at that point. So the reality is, and there's some degree of truth to this. This year, we saw an attack where nearest neighbor attack, the APT28 compromised one business that was next door to their target, jumped from that business over the wireless network to the target and compromised them that way. So 3,000 miles away, they still got in, bypassed any firewalls. So there really is a, targeted attacker is going to find a way in. So the reality is everything we do is managing risk. There's risk of applying a patch. We've seen plenty of patches that are published. You go install it and suddenly your printers aren't working or your servers aren't working. At the same time, if you don't apply a patch, you might get compromised. So everything we do is making choices on risk management, trading off risk. There's high level, there's kind of two focus areas that I look at. There's a tactical response when there's an emerging threat, when everyone's talking about Log4Shell, WannaCry, any of these. How do you respond to that? How do you make sure that if someone says, how's this affect us? What should we do about it? Can you give them the right response that is, well thought out, clear, and not causing a panic at the same time? On the flip side, there's also the strategic planning. There's how do you build a program long-term that manages the risk, that you can show you're reducing risk without burning people out, telling them to go patch every single thing, because we all know we can't do that. How do you do that in a way that you can measure? So I think we all know this, but this is kind of a chart of the growth of CVEs per year. To date, there's been over 285,000 CVEs published through the CV program. Averaged out, doesn't seem too bad. It's 26, 27 years, that's 11,000 a year, but it's accelerated. And you'd see 2017, there was a huge jump. I remember it was just a huge catch up. The program kind of matured. We got some processes in place. So a whole bunch of CVEs came out and it's accelerated since then. It took 16 years to hit 5,000 per year. It took 19 years to hit 10,000 CVEs per year. From there, it was only another 5 years. We were at 20. I talked about this last year and I was saying, we might hit 30,000 this year. Well, we're right around 40,000 this year from 2024. No one is keeping up with that. It's just not possible. Now, what I see a lot, working with customers, working with partners, working with everyone, is a lot of people do what can be considered compliance-based vulnerability management. You've got your, you got your program in place that is, you've got a set of rules, whether it's internally driven or some policy you're trying to adhere to outside. You're basically doing compliance vulnerability management. A lot of that is CVSS high and critical, and it feels like pushing a rock up a never-ending hill. You're never going to finish. You're never going to make progress. And the reality is it's because the rate at which new high and critical vulnerabilities are published essentially cancels out any work you've done. You go, you fix a bunch of things, you get all your patches applied, and you wake up the next morning and there's a whole nother set. Like I said, we have the same thing in research. We get a whole bunch of plugins out, get coverage out, and wake up the next morning, you got to do it all over again. Even when you do make some apparent progress, you can't really prove that you're reducing risk. We all know, CVSS is It's not necessarily going to measure risk. It's not, that was never its intent. Now, the reason I think a lot of organizations use CVSS, use this as sort of the approach is, A, it's based on an industry standard, so it's an easy one to point to. Satisfies, there's some compliance requirements, but even those are loose. The only concrete one is PCI for in-scope systems. The reality is scores are easy to work with. You can measure them, you can put them in a spreadsheet, you can sort, you can filter, you can do all that. So it's really easy to kind of put those in a spreadsheet and track. And you don't have to understand all the details and all the context. You build a report and you issue it. So it's a natural starting point where you're building up your knowledge, trying to figure out how to go about it. But the reality is, and they even have it now, and when they introduced CVSS 3, it was never intended to measure risk. It's a severity metric for prioritization. Now, when you use it to prioritize overall, you're essentially treating it as risk if you're trying to reduce risk. It's essentially telling us if this vulnerability was exploited, here's how bad it's going to be. So remote code execution. If someone successfully leverages remote code execution, they've got shell on your system. That's really bad. It does nothing to say, here's the likelihood of that happening, or they could get that, but it's a low privilege user, so you don't have much happening, or you have these mitigating pieces in place. The CVSS specification tells the analyst, assume the worst case scenario. So that's why you see a lot of memory corruptions, a lot of memory buffer overflows that in the real world might crash the system, get rated as a remote code execution vulnerability. Because in the worst case scenario, you might find a way to exploit that and get a code execution. I've seen countless CV descriptions where it says, buffer overflow, this and this happens, likely denial of service. In some cases, you could have code execution. Immediately takes that from a 5 or a 7 up to a 9, 9, 8. And that's what drives a lot of this. Now, but those numbers, this is all CVs published all the time. Over 50% of CVs published in all time are a higher critical severity. Now, not everyone's got every CV in their environment, I hope, but you're going to have a lot of highs and criticals just by nature of what is out there. It is a huge lift to address every high and critical vulnerability. I did some research. Most organizations have, on average, about 500 high and critical vulnerabilities across their infrastructure, and that can be the same thing on multiple. So that's just on any given day. There's just too much to fix. Like I said, some of this is tied to PCI ASV scanning. If you have PCI requirements, you have to remediate everything that is a 4 or higher, and that's 4 is down in the medium range, within 3 months. High and critical, I believe, is 30 days. But that's for a very narrow case. So we're doing a lot of difficulty to ourselves by really tying ourselves to CVSS severity. Even if you're, like I said, even if you're remediating fast enough, you're going to have another set the next morning to wake up and deal with. Now, there are some steps if you really are tied to CVSS that you can take to leverage it to its fullest, and that's using the what happened here? There we go. That's using the other components. So a lot of people use CVSS base. That's what we use. It's what MVD has. That's what everyone's stuck with. But there are other aspects of CVSS that you can use. There's the temporal metrics, and before it's the threat metrics. I'm actually really happy they dropped everything except the threat component of it. And then the environmental metric, which is going to be very specific to your environment or very specific to your product. These metrics can help adjust that score downward. So if it's a remote code execution, but there's no exploits available, it'll bring the score down some. If you know in your environment that this system is got no useful data, it's not important, it does nothing, you can use environmental metrics to adjust those impact metrics, bring the scores down. This is a good way to, again, start bringing some of that context, help manage those numbers if you're tying yourself to CVSS. So just to show kind of what this means, looking at focus on CVSS 3. Now, I know V4 is the current standard. but I've stuck to V3 because that's where most systems have data. A lot of vendors are still on V3, making the move to V4. So I'm focusing this on V4 or V3. Like I said, the numbers carry forward. 2024 alone, over almost 50% of the CVs had a CVSS severity of higher critical. Now, if I apply just a temporal metric and set the threat level to the appropriate level from not defined to either unproven, proof of concept, exploit available, I can see some adjustment. It's not huge though. We've still got, not even 1,000 less critical vulnerabilities. Decent drop on the highs. We lost about 4,000. A lot of things shifted to the mediums, but there's still a lot of high and critical vulnerabilities to remediate. Now, in my opinion, CVSS is not dropping the score enough when you bring in that threat metric. If something doesn't have a threat, a known exploit, it's a much lower risk. But it is a way you can start to do that. Now, like I said, the temporal is just one piece. The environmental metrics can help you manage this a little more. So I took a common example scenario, lots of 9/8s out there, code execution, you just don't have a change of scope. This is really common. The only thing that keeps it from being a 10 is a scope change, and just means it's bad for your system, not necessarily another one. You may look at this and say, okay, well, the systems that are affected aren't exposed to the internet. They're network adjacent exploit attack vector, not network attack vector. You may also determine that the assets are not important. There's no sensitive data. There's nothing important there. So you can influence this down. And what that looks like is you go from a temporal score goes from a 9.8 to a 9.3 if you say proof of concept. It only goes down to a 9.0 if you say unproven. So not a huge drop. But then you introduce the other environmental metrics. Suddenly you're from a 9.8 down to a 6. You're at a medium. Okay. Now you're outside the high and critical. So you can leverage that to help manage your numbers a little bit more. Focus on the high and critical. Again, if you're tied to CVSS is important. Now there's a risk with this. I've said that this system is not important. It doesn't have sensitive data on it or anything. That ignores lateral movement. Saying it's not exposed to the internet ignores the fact that attackers will get in on the firewall and then they're inside the network. You're no longer protected by that barrier. So yes, you want to focus on the network expose things first, but you can't pretend like no one's ever going to get to those assets. And just because it doesn't have sensitive data doesn't mean it's not useful. You have someone who has, someone who on their laptop, they don't have any useful information, but they like to click on those pictures that they get in their email. Suddenly attackers in on the network and they can pivot from there. So we can't make those assumptions that environmental is going to help us too much. It can mask some of that risk if we're not careful. So what's missing from this? Something I kind of like to say, vulnerability that's never exploited, it's a potential risk. If no one has an exploit, if no one ever exploits it, it might potentially be a risk one day. But without an exploit, it's just potential. Developing reliable exploits, even with AI, even with all the tooling out there, it's still hard, especially if you want to develop an exploit that can be used in the real world, repeated across spaces. Keep in mind, a lot of attackers are probably like developers. You've got to write code, you've got to reuse code, because if you have to write it every time, that's slow and expensive. Not all exploited vulnerabilities are high or critical. There are exploited vulnerabilities that are in the medium range. Now it's less frequent, but that becomes a pivot. So, bad numbers. 54% of all CVEs with a CVSS severity of high or critical. We've covered that one. 48% in 2024. Now, only 13% of the 2024 CVEs had a published proof of concept code. So, again, I really focus on proof of concept because a lot of people like to reuse code. If you don't have proof of concept, you've got to figure it out for yourself. Once the proof of concept is out there, especially if it's good, if it's functional, you can start to pick it up, tweak it, start to weaponize it. So proof of concept to me is sort of that first phase of introducing risk. This thing is going to become a little more dangerous. It's going to get a little more attention. Now, one of the things I think about is how many proof of concepts are out there. If there's one, okay, might not be very useful. If there's 50, there's a lot of attention on it. But again, only 13% had published proof of concept alone. Less than 1% of the 2024 CVs have known active exploitation. So that's out of the 38 to 40,000 that were published in 2024, less than 1% have known active exploitation. Now let's assume that some of that active exploitation flies under the radar and it's not tracked. Even if it's 2, 3, 4%, that is tiny compared to the overall numbers. And it becomes very manageable. If you can really focus on those known active exploitations, you can start to have a difference. You can see your numbers going down. Because when those numbers are a couple hundred, maybe 1,000, it's not this constant sort of baseline. Now, question I like to think about is, what do we focus on? Everyone kind of likes to think about these really sophisticated attackers, nation states that are the best at what they do. And yes, they are absolutely out there. And like I said, if they want in, they're probably going to find a way in. That's where you have the layers of defense. You've got configurations. You've got all sorts of tools to help prevent them. There's also the rest of the bad guys out there. They've got a keyboard and they can pull some code off the shelf and they can run it and point it at something. They are not developing these exploits. They're pulling stuff. It's like any of us pulling from open source software and reusing it. If it's there, we're going to use it. If it's not there, we might not even bother. We put a lot of attention on the advanced threat actor, trying to do everything possible to stop them and ignore sort of this left-hand side of it. Now, the reason it's important is if we can cut off those known exploits, if we cut off the systems that have known exploitation in them, you can cut off the left half. You can at least not be the group that has makes the news because a 13-year-old popped your system with some code that he found on the internet. We want to avoid that. A lot of ransomware as a service, they are reusing code over and over and over again. It is not novel code every single time they do this. So if you can cut those off, you start to cut off those access vectors. We're not going to stop everyone with that, but we can take steps to focus on the things that are most dangerous. So moving forward a little bit, how do we take this kind of to the next level? I was really happy to see when EPSS came out. Every security company out there we've got different scoring mechanisms, machine learning, all of this. EPSS came out. One of the advantages of it is it's not tied to any one company. It's sort of a vendor neutral, I'd say. It's not quite an industry standard yet, but it has the ability to move in that direction. The idea of EPSS is to show the likelihood of vulnerability being exploited in the next 28 days. Again, this becomes useful because without an exploit, it's less dangerous. It's potentially dangerous one day, but not right there yet. So in theory, if the algorithm's right, we should be focusing on the most dangerous vulnerabilities, the ones that are going to get exploited, the ones we know are going to get exploited. That's great, because if we can patch those, if we can take those out of our environment, we're at a lower risk. Because it's a numeric value, it's really easy to sort and organize. Like I said, CVSS is nice. It's a number you can put in a spreadsheet, sort, filter, do all of that. But we have to ask ourselves how it's performing. It's a distribution of the EPSS scores. You see a whole lot of them. It's a probability between 0 and 1. A whole lot of them on the left side. It's good because most CVs, like I said, most CVs are not exploited. So we want to see a lot of the CVs over on the left-hand side. Majority of them have an EPSS score of less than 0.1. If we take a conservative approach and say any CV with an EPSS of 0.3 or higher should be remediated in 30 days, that's only 3% of all CVEs. If we go even narrower and say, look, I want to focus on just the EPSS scores of 0.9 or higher, it's only 2,554. So it's really promising. You've got manageable numbers. You can really start to focus on. You can really pick out these are the things that are important, and you can show progress. You're not having 5,000 CVs added constantly. There's going to be a small number that make it to that top tier. But that's just surface level. That's looking at the distribution. That's assuming, yes, we're super happy with it. We want to look and dig in a little more and understand, is this telling us what we really need to know? Are we confident in the data? Are we going to miss things that are actually dangerous? 80% of the CVs with an EPSS of greater than 0.9, which to me, 0.9, that's pretty, which I think is pretty high. No known exploitation at all. So again, with no known exploitation, it doesn't mean it's not going to be exploited, but that is a very strong indicator of risk. 80% of the CVs at that upper range without it starts to send the signal you might be chasing things that are not important. Not a guarantee, but 25% of CVs with an EPSS greater than 0.9, no known proof of concept. So they have no proof of concept, no known exploitation. So again, this starts to call into the question, are you going to chase things that are not actually at risk at the time? They may become one day. Now, on the other end, the part that I was really wanted to focus on is, are you going to miss things that are dangerous? Are you going to miss things that are problematic? 50% of CVs have no known exploitation and an EPSS is less than 0.1. Now, again, it's probability. This doesn't mean that these are not going to be exploited, but if I wanted to sort and filter, and most of the things are on that bottom end, I'm going to focus on the other end. Well, 50% of the CVs with known exploitation are hiding in that bottom end. Now I got to sift through 150, 200,000 CVs to find the right ones. That's concerning because you could be missing the vulnerabilities that are going to present you a most risk because you're not looking on the low end. And we don't want to look on the low end. There's a lot of CVs in there. 72,000 CVs have public proof of concept code and an EPSS of less than 0.2. Again, proof of concept code is it's a first step towards seeing active exploitation with the exclusion of 0 days. That proof of concept code is going to get picked up, it's going to get reused. So if it's there, that presents a risk. Again, it's not a guarantee that's going to get exploited. See lots of vulnerabilities that go proof of concept, never really get picked up. But this does raise some concerns that there are going to be dangerous vulnerabilities hiding on the lower ends. What's this kind of tell us overall? One of the limits, is a strength, but it's also a limit. EPSS is just a number. When you're making decisions on a number, you're placing all your trust in the scoring algorithm. Now, CVSS, you have an advantage. You know what the algorithm is. You can run your own numbers. You can make some tweaks. You can do adjustments. Machine learning algorithms, and this is true universally, are black boxes. A bunch of data goes in, number comes out. So you have to trust that that black box is giving you the right numbers. With no data to support the numbers, you're putting all of your trust in that number alone. And if you don't evaluate the performance of that model, you're basically guessing. You're hoping it works. It's useful. It looks good, but you're taking a chance. So numbers alone can't kind of give us a day. Now, if we start to see some context added to the data, that can make a big difference. You can start to say, okay, EPSS is here, but I see these things, so maybe they're in conflict with each other. I'm going to go dig on it. This is my, seeing the forest through the trees. What are we going to do? How do we solve the big picture here? So focus area one, like you said, there's tactical response and there's long-term strategy. When you're building a strategy for your vulnerability management program, number one thing is it has to be defensible. You have to be able to explain to someone, I'm doing this because, whether it's I'm doing this because PCI tells me, or I'm doing this because CVS is there, you need to be able to stand behind it. Now, you may be pushed for one reason or another for compliance. So that might always be in the background. We will always, we're always going to cover Microsoft vulnerabilities and Oracle vulnerabilities because everyone's going to ask for them. So you set your SLAs, you set your programs around that. That's going to be there. That's your day-to-day. You're just going to deal with it. Within that, you want to identify true risk. You want to make sure you're not, your program is going to focus on true risk. You want to have defensible and measurable approaches for reducing risk. You don't want to go print your report on how you're doing and it's just a flat line. Every time you give your report to, higher up, say, well, we're not going up, but we're not going down. We're doing okay. You want to be able to say we're reducing risk. Remediating high and critical vulnerabilities does not guarantee you're reducing risk. You might remediate the ones that are not exploited. So what can you focus on? How do you show that you're reducing risk? SysAkev has about 1,300 CVs. We track collection more. So we have about 1,549 CVs with known exploitation. That's a small number. That's not 283,000. If you can focus on those You're remediating the vulnerabilities that are being exploited. So there is a clear defensible explanation of I'm reducing risk. These are being exploited. I'm removing them from my environment. Therefore, they can't be exploited. And that number is small. It's not going to, you're going to be able to go down, and then you'll have little blips at the bottom. When something new comes out, you patch it, it's out. But you have good numbers to show. If you stick to a sort of neutral source, 1,300 in CVSS. They have a kind of specific focus, so there's things that won't show up there, just data and everything. But again, it's defensible. CISA is a trusted source. They are telling us these are known exploited vulnerabilities. So if you can remediate those, you're going to make progress. You're going to demonstrate a reduction in risk. So when someone says, why are you doing it this way? We're reducing risk. We track 381 CVEs associated with ransomware. Probably goes without saying, but no one wants to get hit by ransomware. Now, I know CVEs are not the only way that attackers are getting in through ransomware, but it is a vector. So if you can remove that, you're at least removing that vector of attack. So we put a lot of, we try to call attention to those, because if you can remove those vulnerabilities, you can remove a chunk of your ransomware risk. And again, it's not a huge number. It's a manageable number. Now, this is a bucket I like to look at, what we kind of track as persistently exploited vulnerabilities. These are CVEs that for some reason, they just stick around. There's still CVEs from 2017 that are leveraged in attacks. Why those are still around, I don't know. But these are the sorts of vulnerabilities that if you've got these, you should get rid of them. It means they've been around for a while, probably. They are attractive targets. They're probably super reliable. They're very easy. There's lots of tooling. You want to get rid of these. These are very easy for attackers to go after. And then another bucket we focus on is the recently exploited. Things come and go. It's the internet. Nothing disappears. But what are the vulnerabilities that we see the most activity on from the attackers? What are the vulnerabilities that you might get hit opportunistically just because that's what's being scanned for? So right now this number changes. It's probably different from when I put this together a week ago. But at the time, 26 recently exploited CVEs. These are CVEs that we see mention of in the news. We see activity from scanning services. It's not a huge number. Very manageable. Now, maybe, talking about this, maybe everyone's doing this. I've checked, see about 100 CISA-KEV vulnerabilities in customer environments at any given time. They're out there. These are not getting remediated the way I would hope they are. So I think the CISA-KEV has delivered on a promise. It gives people something to anchor to, but we really need to put attention to that, or whatever else you want to pick to help reduce your risk. Now, another piece of this, again, this kind of comes back to the CVSS temporal, not tied specific to the assets, but know which assets are externally facing. See a lot of attention in the last year and a half of attackers leveraging network devices, VPNs, firewalls that are externally facing with a management interface on the internet. I know it's nice to be able to access a management interface from home, but we seem to not be able to secure them, and they're an easy access factor. If you remove that, you're removing some of your risk. If it's externally facing, you want to at least attack those first, because externally facing vulnerabilities that are code execution, zero click, those are going to get hit really fast. So if you can patch those fast, that's ideal. Which assets are internal and remotely exploitable? Like I said, once they're inside the network because someone downloaded a cool meme, those are going to become the next thing. Which ones present risk for lateral movement? What has data sensitivity? You want to build all of this into your strategy so that you're not just going whack-a-mole trying to patch everything as quick as possible. Focus on the things that are most important. Potential strategy. SLAs for all high and critical vulnerabilities. We'll just keep that one on the plate. I don't know that it's going anywhere. If those have superseding fixes, just apply the latest one, unless there's a reason you can't. And this mirrors kind of some of our approach. Have planned response for known events. I know every second Tuesday of the month is going to be Patch Tuesday. I used to be up till 3 in the morning writing plugins for it. It's ingrained in my head. It's never going away. Oracle CPU, it's the closest Tuesday to the 17th each quarter. You can tell I've done that one a few times too. Plan for the known events. They're coming. You put your resources to it. Get fixed as quick as you can. Automate patching for low risk software. Update Google Chrome. You're probably not going to break something. Firefox, probably not going to break something. Hopefully not. Then put very rapid remediation, aggressive SLAs for known exploited vulnerabilities. 7 days. I mean, attackers are leveraging these things in 1, 2, 3 days. Give yourself a little room, 7 days, as quickly as you can. These are the things you want in your strategy. These are what we want to fix quickly. And then have a playbook for responding to emerging risk vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities that are in the news cycle. Everyone's screaming about. Some of them are bad, some of them are less bad. So that gets into the tactical response. This is where I think context is the most important. A few of the fun ones, I've been at it since, Heartbleed kind of set this in motion. That got all the attention, started putting names to them. Jumped the shark when we did Mousejack, where someone can intercept your mouse clicks and turn them into keyboard clicks, and it was kind of silly. These get a ton of attention. They're in the news. Because they're in the news, everyone's talking about them. You have people saying we got to cover them. Everyone's in panic. Most of them amount to nothing. And when I say most of them amount to nothing, what I mean is most of them don't get exploited. They sound really bad. No one picks them up. How do you deal with that? How do you make a decision? Now, there's kind of two things that I see happen. One, and sit there saying, everything's fine. This is nothing, it'll pass over. We'll move on to the next thing. At least you're not getting everyone in panic over nothing. You're not going to upset someone by telling them to go fix something that they can't fix or that they disagree with you on. You're not going to, but there's a high risk of getting it wrong and getting compromised, because the ones of these that do end up being bad end up being really bad, and they get picked up quick. So it's kind of a dangerous approach because you're just ignoring the risk. The other one, and I have kids, they love trolls. So of course it's got to be the troll. This is a person who every time one of these drops, they go in a panic. They tell everyone stop what you're doing. We got to patch immediately, do everything, go fix it. They don't take, they don't take into account any of the context. Now, if you can do that, awesome, go fix them. More often than not, you're probably destroying trust when you go tell everyone, go patch this thing. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. They go through a ton of work to patch it. Turns out nothing ever happened. No one cared. The problem there is trust. The next time when something really bad does happen and you say, hey, we got it out of band, we got to go fix it, no one's going to trust you. No one's going to do it. Trust is really important in our industry. Not having it makes it really hard for us to ask someone again to go stop what they're doing, go fix something. This is especially true. If you got to bring down a customer facing service because you got to cycle it and patch it, that's a cost. You don't want to incur that without having a good reason. So a couple examples that I've seen. The cups vulnerability. I think this was sometime last year. The initial post of this, there's a series of CVEs. The initial post, unauthenticated RC in all GNU Linux systems, terrified me. We got internal Slack channel going, said, all right, our weekend is ruined in 2 or 3 weeks, but at least we know it's coming. So let's just plan for that. That scope, all Linux systems, broad deployment, that made us worried. Unauthenticated RC, that's scary. That's really bad. Then we saw some of the discussion coming. We saw some of what's happened. There was a lot of chatter about, well, this is something that shouldn't be deployed, or it's easier readable, or it's easy to work on. So it told us maybe this is not as bad as it was. Maybe the scope's not as bad. Maybe it's configuration required. Turned out it was a bad vulnerability, but it was in something that you shouldn't really have running. You shouldn't be configured in that way. A lot of vendors, Red Hat, a lot of the other distributions, they don't ship that by default in that manner. So it was bad, but it was not bad enough to cause a whole panic over. And we managed that internally. We had a discussion. We went through, we said, okay, what are all the details? Okay, sounds bad. We'll get a blog post out. We'll get some plugins out, but we're not going to go do this huge response that we're going to drag everyone to. And we do some huge responses. We pull a lot of resources to make things happen. Some of the things we look at in here, scope, broad deployment, but not as broad as it initially looked. I think there were like 70,000 actual, internet exposed instances of this. Ease of exploitation, network accessible, should not be exposed to the internet. Some of them were, but the really key piece is, it wasn't vulnerable in a default configuration. The initial exploit was trivial, but the actual chain to really leverage this, you had, I think it was 3 or 4 CVs that you had to chain together. At some point in there, you had to get someone to install a malicious printer that you created that had there were actually a lot of steps to have a successful attack. And it's not something you should have. So a lot of the remediation was just go turn it off, stop using it, or change this configuration. So ease of remediation was another piece of, okay, this is going to hopefully disappear fairly quickly. There was a proof of concept, but it was more of it's a descriptive proof of concept. It wasn't something that could be weaponized easily. No known exploitation in the wild. So it's one of these ones, there was a ton of noise. We had a discussion, turned out to not be so much. The CV, vulnerability in Ivanti Secure Connect. Now, again, different level of product, but evidence of zero-day exploitation in the wild. Remote code execution could be paired with a authentication bypass, so suddenly authentication requirement goes away. Broad scope is a popular VPN access tool. VPN is internet facing by design. That's why we have VPNs. So that means anyone can just go up and hit it. Edge products are easily accessible. Ease of attack, fairly trivial. And once you have that access to that system, your VPNs are trusted services. So once you're on there, you're in a trusted point where you can pivot your attack further and further. There was available proof of concept pretty quickly. And exploitation wild, it was identified pre-disclosure. So this was an easy one for us. Like, this is bad. We're going to get people moving. We're going to do what we can to cover it. And I was thankful, very timely for this presentation. Another fun one that I got a lot of people asking me about. There's a CV and Apache Parquet. I said the headlines were lots of fun. Max severity RCE flaw discovered in widely used Apache Parquet. Severe threat, big data environment. CVSS 4 was 10.0. Proof of concept available. Like, a lot of people say, okay, this sounds bad. What are we doing? Like, this is going to be bad. Well, first off, you shouldn't be loading malicious Parquet file. Like, you shouldn't be loading an untrusted Parquet file. So if you're doing that, you might want to have some discussions internally about how you're handling those. Successful attack, like a successful attack required tricking user into reading in the malicious Parquet files, having it exposed. Like, the actual path to exploiting this was bad. So this is like, the impact of this vulnerability is bad. It's remote code execution 10.0, it's bad. But the likelihood of this being picked up and leveraged is not so bad. I've watched the last couple of days, still no evidence that I've seen of exploitation, no more proof of concepts posted. So this one will probably fizzle out like a lot of the other ones. Again, it's an exercise we go through on this regular basis of everyone's in a panic. How do we manage our expectations? How do we help people understand, yes, I know this sounds bad, but we don't need to go reload all our services that are using Apache Parquet. Let's come up with a plan to patch, because we don't want to ignore it, but I'm not going to make you all stop what you're doing, pull downtime and do that. So overall, these are some of the things that we look at to help us manage our plan, manage how we respond. These are the indicators. This is some of the context that we find valuable. Scope of impact. Is this an application that is used by one person because it's posted, somewhere on the internet and they found it useful, but no one else has it? Or is this an application that's broadly deployed? It has very popular customer base. That's one thing. Keep in mind, the goal of an attack is to compromise as many targets as you can. If the product's only used by one person, that's not very attractive. It's used by a lot, it's going to be more attractive. Ease of exploitation. How easy is the exploit? If the exploit requires a lot of complicated things to happen, you got to trick someone into locating a malicious Parquet file, it's going to be a lot harder to exploit. Ease of attack. The exploit might be easy, but if you got to pivot then 5 more steps to actually make something useful happen, it's also less attractive. It's a lot of work. Again, attackers are racing us. If we patch it before they get to it, then it's useless. So if they're spending all their resources building an attack that's complicated, and it goes away because of a patch, then no good. Ease of remediation. If it's really easy to patch, if it's easy to mitigate because it's a configuration you shouldn't have, it's going to be less, it's not going to be around as long. Availability of proof of concept code. Like I said, that's a first step towards having an exploit available. Makes it easier for someone to pick it up off the shelf, point it at someone, weaponize it. And then the big one, exploitation in the wild. Once we see that, we really want to get people moving on it, because even if you're not targeted, a lot of this is just opportunistic scanning. I'm going to scan the internet for Ivanti Connect, and I'm going to hit whatever I can, and I'm going to get some of them. You don't want to get hit opportunistically. If you're the person hit by the 0 day, it's unfortunate. Like no one wants to have that happen, but I don't think there's software out there that doesn't have a 0 day lurking somewhere underneath. Like that's just the reality of where we're at. So you want to at least go after what's exploited in the wild. These are when we have these major events, this is how we approach it. This is how we make our decisions. Oh, quick summary. You can build a data-driven risk reducing VM strategy. You can show risk. You've got to have the right context. You've got to be able to explain, here's why we're doing this. Here's the data that we have. We know these are exploited. It's manageable. It's a security program that you can stand behind. The context is what helps you do that. Numbers are great. You can sort, you can filter on numbers, but context is really useful to help explain why that number is bad, why this EPSS of 0.001 is actually bad. It's got a known exploitation. Also, having those contextual data points, that helps you have that response. So when everyone's in a panic, when everyone's saying, what are we doing about our Apache Parquet services? You can say, we're coming up with a remediation plan. Don't panic. No one's weaponized this. It's probably not going to get weaponized. We're going to work on it over the next month and have a manageable response without everyone panicking. Questions?
Anybody having any questions? I've got one coming in on Discord, so just give me 1 second, but we can take one in the room while we're waiting. Yeah.
How do you track the success of your remediation efforts over time when you have all these vulnerabilities coming in?
So what I would do, track, here's the vulnerabilities. Here's what we know is being exploited in the wild. So if you might have different tables. We're reporting on ransomware vulnerabilities. I'll use that one. So you have to know which vulnerabilities in your environments, which applications have that. And you want to be able to measure, here's the findings we had at the start of the month. Here's those findings. Here's how many of them we've remediated, and here's how new ones. So you want to be able to report and have that data point to track. If you have the data point and you know the vulnerabilities and you know it's the environment, you can build a report on, here's what we've remediated. A couple more came in. You need to have the data point of ransomware, or SysCav is the one that everyone can use. Build a report on that. It's tied to CV, so you can track those in your environment and build the reports off of that. Yeah.
Volkan from Pico Security. I like how you frame it. The environmental parameters that are underutilized, definitely it's a good move there. And in the environmental parameters, there's also the compensating controls. What do you think about that? It's also very underutilized, or not much data is about there. So any thoughts about Tenable moving forward with that?
I think compensating controls are it's a useful mechanism. It'd be hard to fit that from an overall picture and prove I have the compensating control and do it in a reportable way. But if you have the ability to show this application is blocked by this firewall, so I've reduced some of the risk, or I have EDR tool that's going to prevent this sort of attack, I think it's a great way, if you can measure it and track it, to also factor that into your context.
Hey, I'll be nice. I appreciated you talking about the kind of the risk-based, do the assessments, the context, et cetera. What do you say to your customers who don't have time to create their own vulnerability management process, and they're just, Tenable says X, so I believe it, and that's it. And it's like zero context, that's it. Because you're going to see all those criticals and highs, and they're not doing any additional work, and they're like, this is all I believe. So what do you say to your customers who do that?
So one of the things we've done actually is, I kind of look at, we've got your compliance base. If you're going to just do CVSS, cool. We have capabilities now that we are trying to get customer use, where they can actually build their reports on ransomware or on persistently exploited. So they can use that data. It's actually in the product. They can look and they say, all right, I'm tracking all my CVEs. I have an initiative. I'm focused on ransomware. And I'm going to track this initiative over the entire year and show I got my ransomware vulnerabilities down to here. Got like 1% from 80%. So what I do is push them towards those capabilities that let you take a risk-based approach on it.
Sorry, I got another question in Discord. This is from Candace. Can you give some concrete examples of role buckets for contextual prioritization? I've heard recommendations, for example, to flag C-suite devices, or is that a bad idea in general?
It's going to be very dependent on your environment. And I actually, like, a lot of discussions that I hear are sort of this pitch of like, yeah, I can identify the C-suite, device, and that's bad if they've got, vulnerabilities. I'm actually a lot more concerned about the senior staff software engineer who has access to every single resource. They've got GitHub access. That part, I'm myself, I'm probably like, I don't want anything. So it depends on your environment. Like your support person, that it's going to be a different, they may have access to the support portal and that could cause some damage. So you want to understand your environment, what your biggest risks are. C-suite, it's definitely bad, but my guess is you're probably going to have more of a reputational impact than I hope your C-suite's not logging in and committing code.
So I love your slides about temporal CVSS components and the other one. Great, environmental, that's what it was. We have 50,000 vulnerabilities. I can't manually calculate the temporal and environmental for all of them. How do we automate that process? So when I'm looking at everything, because again, I don't want to just look at the base for 90% of them and 10% I'm going to put the rest of them in. How do I automate that so I have a good objective normalization of all my vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so you want to be able to tag your assets if you can. So these are all my assets that are low information risk or low confidentiality risk, and then be able to build some capabilities either within whatever tool you're using or externally that takes the base score, then your own tags that say these are the low risk ones or these are mitigated by a compensating control, and have processes that can do that. It's going to depend on what tool you have. But you definitely, it's the most important is knowing what your assets are and knowing where they are and being able to tag them and track that easily.
Any other questions? Oh, one more over there. Then you.
So I know with a lot of vulnerability scanners, they'll show like confirmed vulnerabilities and potentials. You weigh that in to, I guess, the methodology for analyzing when you have like 50,000. So you have something that would be very critical if it was confirmed to be true, but we're not really sure if the system's impacted.
Yeah. So to me, that confirmed versus potential is something we've talked about a lot. Is confirmed as a thing. It's a really useful mechanism to have SLAs on. So again, this is that trust factor. If it's confirmed, go give someone a really aggressive SLA. Say you've got to fix it in 3 days. You're not worried that they're going to come back and argue with you about false positives and I can't do this and I can't do that. So where I find it useful is if it's confirmed, just start hitting those SLAs really aggressively. The potential, in principle, what you want to do is say, okay, here's my bucket of potentials. These ones are really bad. So I'm going to go do some extra analysis. I'll talk to the team that owns the assets and say, are you running in this configuration? Are you doing this? So you're going to put a lot more work into triaging those. But the value I find in confirmed versus potential is you don't kill the trust when you go tell someone to go fix something and they say, I'm not vulnerable because of X, Y, and Z, or I already fixed it. So then when you have that sort of bucket that you've got to triage, then you prioritize that based on, real risk versus perceived risk.
Hey, so obviously you don't want to have big costs incurred by downtime. You don't want to destroy trust in your customers or your partners. How do you, I guess, navigate the need for risk tolerance, the need to patch these vulnerabilities? How do you figure out where that inflection point is where you need to take your services down?
That's going to depend on every organization. I mean, you got to look at the cost of, what is that downtime? Can you roll through it because you've got, load balancing. So you do this server, then this server, then this server. How bad is this thing being exploited by every single attacker everywhere in the world? Is it, log4shell that there's a part of me that keeps saying I wish there was a new one because I'm tired of saying log4shell, but I really don't want another one. No. So it's all about weighing risk. The most important thing when you have to do that, ideally, whatever your prioritization, however you're deciding, you've got buy-in, so you can go to the team and say, here's how we've come to this decision. It's not because everyone's screaming about it. We're looking for vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited or being actively exploited. We're coming to you because this one is known to be exploited. Everyone's attacking it and we're vulnerable. So it's going to depend on a lot of factors.
Anybody got any other questions? All right. Thank you, Luke. Appreciate it.